I'm Maria, a 2D animator from the UK. Welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, I'm currently making a short film, and this channel is where I'm documenting the ups and downs of the process, mostly to hold myself accountable so that I actually get it finished. Now, I know I haven't posted in a while, but with good reason. Honestly, a lot has happened, and this is going to be a quick update of where I've been and how the project is going, but I've also debated on whether or not to make this video at all. Hi guys, I just wanted to quickly add this. This video is not going to be short. I was editing it last night, and it's a lot longer than I thought it would be. So you may as well grab a tea and settle in, make yourself comfortable, because last year was an absolute dumpster fire and we have a lot to catch up on. But before we get into it, quick disclaimer: this video is based on my own personal experience as a freelance animator. It's meant to educate and inform other artists about industry practices, not to target with fame any company or any individual. All opinions expressed are my own and should not be taken as a statement of absolute fact. Okay. I want this channel to be about storytelling, creative projects, a place to escape. I never wanted to focus on the animation industry, let alone the uglier side of it. But last year I found myself in a situation which drained my time, energy and passion. Time I should have been channeling into my own projects, and honestly that really pissed me off. I have sat with this for a while and I realised if you're an animator, a creative or aspiring to work as one, then I think you need to hear the story, because what happened to me happens all the time across all the creative industries. And the more we talk about it and speak up and share our experiences, the more we can protect each other. So, let's get into it. So, we're going back a bit. Around May to June 2023, I had just wrapped up on working on the series and spent the summer job hunting for my next animation gig. However, I quickly noticed that there was a significant lack of animation work during this period, a period which coincided with the SAG-AFTRA protests. I was noticing that friends across film, television and animation were sharing that the effects of the protests were ripping out across the creative industries, and many projects were being put on hold, leaving myself and other creatives out of work. Like many others, I was scrambling at this time. I was taking odd jobs where I could to keep myself afloat while I waited for the industry to bounce back. But even with a little bit of money coming in, it just wasn't enough. And an uncertain summer turned into autumn with no steady work on the horizon. I don't want to dwell too much on this time as it was really stressful. Luckily though, I had my projects to focus on and I did have a lot to do. I was finishing both scripts, working on the table reads, editing the last videos which I posted, reorganising my ideas for upcoming content, and starting the concept art and character designs for both projects. So that was a very welcome and much needed distraction during those dark times. Then around Christmas I started to see more job postings. But, and here's the catch, every job I saw required knowledge of Toon Boom. And up until that point, I had mostly worked in cell action, as most studios in the UK and Ireland, I don't know, seem to prefer working in that software to produce children's TV animation. But suddenly I was seeing this shift, and it seemed that every job I saw was asking for Toon Boom experience. There were no cell action jobs being advertised at all. And I hadn't used Toon Boom since 2020, when I did a short online course during the first lockdown. I realised if I wanted to secure any work, I'd have to pivot and brush up on my skills ASAP. Over Christmas, I set myself the goal of familiarising myself with Toon Boom again, brushing up on what I already knew, filling in any gaps in my knowledge, and I personally found the Toon Boom website the most helpful for learning what I needed. There's also another animator who I came across called, and let me see if I can pronounce his name, Fabio Geoffrey, I think is his last name. His videos are clear and to the point, which is great if you're impatient like me and don't want to have to sit through a long and boring tutorial. I highly recommend his channel and I'll leave a link below. Hi, it's me again. I'm still waiting for my flight, it's still quite early. But I was thinking to myself, let's just keep things interesting and play a little game called Spot the Red Flags. Let's see how many you can spot, and feel free to take a drink every time that you spot one. And yeah, let's just keep it entertaining. So, from December into the new year, I was brushing up on Toon Boom while still on the lookout for work. Then, in early January, a studio reached out to me on Facebook, asking if I was available. And honestly, looking back at it now, this was pretty peculiar because studios rarely do this. If a studio wants to contact you about your availability, it's usually through email, possibly LinkedIn, but not Facebook. In hindsight, this was a red flag, but may I remind you, I needed work. I'd been out of work for many, many months, and there was nothing else on the horizon at the time, so I agreed to an interview. Another thing which struck me as odd were the interviews themselves. Typically, the process involves one interview, possibly an animation test if necessary. If you're working remotely, there may also be a meeting with the director or animation leads before you start, just to kind of meet everyone and get familiar, but that's rare. Time is precious when you're working in TV animation, and studios just want to crew up and get the production on the road. This studio, however, wanted a total of 4 interviews, plus an animation test. Each interview somehow seemed to leave me more in the dark than before on when the production would be starting and if I would even get the job. Everything was just really vague and unclear, and it was quite honestly super odd. Eventually though, I did receive a confirmation email saying you've got the job and here's your contract. Side note, if you are a young animator, I strongly advise reading your contract several times. It might seem obvious, but even if you don't understand the legal jargon, it's crucial to get a general idea of what's in there, what the studio expects of you, what you expect from them, etc. And the more contracts you read, you'll start to notice that there are common elements like contract length, work hours, duties, pay, NDAs. NDAs is short for non-disclosure agreement that protect sensitive information during the production. Get familiar with your contracts. I cannot stress this enough. If it's difficult to understand all the legal terminology, run it through ChatGPT if you need to, but read your contracts, it's really important. When I sat down to read the contract from this new studio, I found it really strange. There were loads of typos, spelling mistakes, and vague wording. But what really caught my attention was that the studio had informed me that the production would last from February until June. Yet, my contract only covered February up until April. That was odd, because if you're hiring animators, typically you want them to be on board for the entire production. When I questioned the studio about this, they claimed it was just a trial basis to see how I performed. I have like 10 years worth of experience working on different shows, so I found this quite peculiar that they thought I needed a trial period, particularly since they approached me. Anyway, whatever. I needed a paycheck, so against my better judgment, I decided to overlook it and focus on my new job. But remember that part about the contract only running to April, because that will come back to bite me later. The first couple of weeks working at this studio were interesting. I've never been in a production like this. It was really disorganised. We were expected to attend hour-long meetings every morning and every evening, 5 days a week, so the studio could check in on our progress. This was a massive waste of time. 2 hours every day, 5 days a week, over the course of 4 to 5 months. Time which could have been better spent actually getting the work done. We really did not need all of those meetings. Everyone on the team had access to an episode tracker, which is a shared document that allocates scenes to each animator and keeps track of the progress. In more organised studios, there's typically a briefing at the start of each episode where the scenes are assigned, the director provides technical or acting notes, and when you look at the tracker, your name is beside each scene you're expected to complete. As you finish the scenes, you mark them as done, and everyone can see everyone else's progress just by checking the tracker. It's a simple but effective system that many studios use. Also, we are adults and professionals. The studio did not need to treat us like children by holding so many meetings. They could trust us to get the work done because everyone wants to get paid. There's also a lot to do. You really cannot waste time. So the studio demanding that everyone stop working just to go over who's done what when we can simply check the tracker is really counterproductive, unnecessary. They also wanted us to block the episode in sections, which is strange. Usually everyone works on blocking or doing the rough animation keys for the entire episode. Then the director and lead animators watch the whole episode back in the edit, make notes on what needs to be fixed, and everyone gets those notes to implement before moving on to in-betweening and finishing off their scenes. But this studio's approach was an absolute mess. We were splitting the episode into 3 sections, A, B and C, that cut off at really strange moments in the story, which led to lots of continuity issues. Sometimes I'd receive scenes with characters and props missing. Oh, and did I mention, about a week into production, I realised we had no director, no animation leads. The person who I'd been told was our lead animator vanished halfway through the first episode for a whole month. We had about 4 mid-level animators, including myself, and everyone else working on the production was fresh out of uni, with no experience of working on a production of this size whatsoever. The producer was sending the episode edits to the client for feedback, which also should not be happening. Ideally, you want to fix as much as possible in-house before sending any updates to the clients. The whole project was just really disorganised and not how a production should be run. But running a production wasn't my job. That's not what I was hired to do. My job was to animate the scenes to the best of my ability, and as long as I was getting paid, despite all the chaos around me, I was happy to do that. April. Spring is in the air and we're about 2 months into this circus of a production. Now, remember my contract? I mentioned I was only contracted from February to April, even though I had been informed that the production would be set to last until June. Well, I had forgotten all about that. We were in the middle of a deadline, in the middle of chaos, and that was the last thing on my mind. The studio messaged me, asking if we could have a chat since my contract was coming to an end and we needed to extend it, and I said, of course. So we jumped into a Zoom call, but once in the meeting, the studio announced that they were having issues with the budget, which meant they could not pay me my full day rate. They offered me a new day rate, which was about half of what I had asked for, telling me that if I wasn't happy with this new day rate, I was welcome to leave and seek employment elsewhere. Now, remember I mentioned that dry spell in the industry? The lack of work? Well, that was still happening. I had been keeping an eye out for new job postings, but there wasn't much work available at the time. I felt completely blindsided by this, and there was pressure to make a decision quickly. I needed money, and suddenly having my salary slashed in half was really distressing, especially since there were no other job opportunities. So reluctantly, I agreed to the new contract. In my mind, having something coming in was better than nothing coming in at all. But, and I cannot stress this enough, I was not happy with the situation. When I finally sat down to do the math and realised just how much I would be losing out on each month until June, I was furious. I felt cheated because I believe the studio may have known full well that there wasn't any work available and they may have used that to their advantage. Over the weekend, I had time to think things over, and I started to wonder if I was the only one that the studio had pulled this stunt on. With everyone working remotely, it was hard to tell what was going on. We had animators, designers and a rigger scattered across the UK, one in Spain, one in Italy, a couple working in Canada. Usually if you're working in-house, you can gauge the general mood from chats during tea breaks, but with this production, the only time I saw the rest of my team was during those hour-long meetings. We didn't know each other. There was no one on this production I had worked with before, so we were all isolated and I had no idea what was going on. However, during the Monday morning production meeting, I spoke up about not being happy with the new pay, and I was swiftly ushered into a one-to-one meeting by the studio to be reprimanded. During that meeting, they accidentally let something slip. They said they did not want the rest of the team talking to each other, which I found rather interesting and highly suspicious. Once the meeting was over, the studio went on their way, probably thinking that they had well and truly put me in my place. But my Mars is in Aries, and if you're an astrology girly, you'll know exactly what that means. Mars is the god of war, after all. So, the moment the meeting had ended, I was immediately messaging the rest of the team to find out what the hell was going on. So this is where things start to get interesting. As I spoke with the others on my team, I was surprised and a little comforted to find out that I wasn't alone in feeling bewildered with the chaotic nature of this production. Everyone else was expressing how bizarre working for this show was. None of them had ever worked on a production that was this disorganised before, and they questioned if the studio really knew what they were doing, because it certainly seemed like they didn't. It seemed to myself and the others on the team that the studio was pretty much making things up as they went along. I also learnt that everyone else was being underpaid. Those who were in the UK had been given excuses about the budget, while the animators who were working abroad had been told by the studio that there was a cap on day rates in the UK. This is not a thing. Guys, this is not a thing, this is nonsense. This is something that the studio had plucked out of thin air so that they could underpay everyone. Another person on the production who was a recent graduate was being paid £900 per month, which works out as £45 per day and around £4.50 per hour. You simply cannot live on that in the UK. Also, the national living wage in the UK is around £11.44. So paying someone £4.50 per hour, if they are working full-time hours, which I believe this person was, is illegal and exploitative. The studio was able to get away with it because the animator was a recent graduate, new to the industry, and had no idea about their employment rights. And this is why I'm doing this video, guys. I don't know about other countries, but in the UK, there is a flaw in the education system. Universities and schools simply aren't teaching students the basics about employment rights, how to read contracts, how to manage their personal and business finances, the ins and outs of being self-employed, accounting, budgeting, paying their taxes, etc, etc, etc. These are all really crucial skills you need to know, particularly if you want to work in the creative industries. The reason they don't teach these things? Because it doesn't benefit companies, bosses and CEOs if people know their employment rights inside out and back to front. This could lead to a much larger conversation about the way our society is set up in general and how creativity isn't valued or prioritised, but this is a conversation for another time, for another video, and potentially even another channel. If you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, please, please, please educate yourselves on your rights as an employee and a contractor. It doesn't matter whether you're an animator or not, just please do it. I hope my experience helps to shed some light on these issues and encourages you to stand up for yourselves and what you deserve. So, after doing some snooping and speaking to the others on my team, we quickly realised that everyone was being exploited. And it suddenly made sense why we didn't have a director or any lead animator on the production, as senior staff command higher salaries and the studio was clearly trying to cut some corners. I've been really fortunate to have worked for some amazing studios that really appreciate their animators, the time, the hard work and the skill and the talent that they bring, and pay them accordingly. So it really angers me that this studio was treating its artists like this. As soon as I realised that we were in trouble, I began creating a document noting everything about the studio that was out of line or out of the ordinary or just downright exploitative compared to other studios. If you find yourself in a similar situation where you're not being treated fairly at work, regardless of whether you work in the creative industries or not, start writing everything down. Document every incident, every comment, who said what, where, when, dates, times, etc. It's useful to have a detailed record in case you have to take things further. Regarding the situation with the studio underpaying everyone, I felt especially upset and angry on the part of the younger members of our team. It was their first experience in the industry, and when you're starting out, all you want to do is do what you love and prove yourself. The fact that this studio thought nothing of taking advantage of them is quite frankly disgusting. Young creatives need help and guidance wherever possible, because trying to make a living from your creativity and art is hard enough as it is, especially if you're from a background like mine where no one in your family is a creative or a freelancer. If your parents work in the creative industries, then naturally they will teach you this stuff. But if you are relying on universities to do so, I doubt they will cover this stuff adequately. Maybe if you attend an amazing university, they might, but my university completely skipped over quite a few important topics, like how to write a cover letter, what to include in your showreel, how to present and organise your website, and things you need to be aware of as you're entering the industry. I was shocked to find that some of the younger members of our team had no idea what an invoice was. An invoice. If you don't have anyone to guide you on these essentials, it can be incredibly stressful. So, as I mentioned at the start, I was very hesitant to sit down and make this video, but as I've just pointed out, if you're just starting out as a creative on this career path and don't have guidance, it can be really difficult and incredibly daunting. So that's why I've decided to offer one-to-one sessions for any fledgling animators who are just starting out in their careers. If you are an aspiring creative seeking mentorship and information, I want to offer advice on portfolios, showreels, cover letters, being freelance, websites, and any other advice I'm able to provide from my own experience of working in this industry. So if that's something you need and would be interested in, head over to my Instagram and check out the information in this highlight to see my prices. And if you would like to book a power hour, send me a DM with your questions and links to your portfolio and we'll arrange a chat. Because of the situation with the studio, I ended up getting in touch with Beck2 to find out if they could help us with the situation that we were in. For anyone who isn't aware, Beck2 is a trade union which represents workers in the media and entertainment industries in the UK. Beck2 stands for Broadcasting, Entertainment, Communications and Theatre Union, which are the industries that they cover. There is also the Animation and Visual Effects Union, or AVU, which is a branch of Beck2. Both Beck2 and AVU provide legal support, problem solving and advice to their members who are experiencing issues at work, but AVU specifically advocates for the needs of animation and visual effects professionals. If you're currently in a situation where you're being unfairly treated by a studio, I recommend checking out Beck2's websites, which I will link below, and getting familiar with the range of support that they offer. Do consider becoming a member. It's like £10 per month, but it's worth joining so you have somewhere to turn to for support should you run into difficulties. So if you need help with legal and employment issues, go to Beck2. If you want a more personal one-to-one chat where I go through your website, work and showreel and give you advice on what you need to know generally as a freelancer as you start out in this industry, then feel free to DM me on Instagram. Back to the story. So, May-June time. Myself and the other animators had formed a group chat by this time where we could discuss our situations privately and work out a plan of action. I was already in contact with Bectu during this time, so I emailed them to ask if we could arrange a group meeting with a union representative. And in the first online meeting, there were about 10 to 11 of us. Everyone had varying issues with the studio, and despite this, the union rep was really, really helpful and incredibly informative. At this point, we were in the middle of an episode. I think we had all been contracted to do about 4 or 5 episodes, and most of our contracts were ending in June. It seemed that the studio expected us to automatically extend our contracts without proper compensation, but most of us by this time had had enough and were choosing not to continue. The situation had completely deteriorated by this time when the studio stopped paying everyone entirely. Some team members, including myself, were owed 2 weeks' worth of wages, others all of May, and there was one person who hadn't been paid in 6 weeks. You can't stop paying people and expect them to continue working. It does not work like that. So we decided to announce our decision not to extend our contract in the final week, even though the episode was only about half finished. Once we left, we were all very, very apprehensive about finding work. As I said, the situation, hadn't improved. But we collectively felt that unemployment was better than continuing to deal with this particular studio. The situation had become extremely stressful. Our relationship with the studio had deteriorated a lot. It was very, very tense at this point. We were not happy with each other. And with no pay, our motivation to work had completely evaporated, which of course had impacted the quality of the episode. After we left, we saw the studio scrambling online to hire new animators. However, if you are making a show and bringing on new animators halfway through, it takes them time, at least 1 to 2 weeks, to get used to the pace of production and the style of the show. And as far as I'm aware, the studio had looming deadlines which they weren't able to make in time. But that was none of our concern. Now that we had left, our focus had shifted to job hunting and working with the union to secure payment for what we were owed by the studio. When you are owed money by a studio, there's a process to follow. You must give them a specific amount of time to pay, typically a month. If they miss that deadline, then you can start emailing them to demand payment and adding interest to your invoices each day that they delay. In the UK, if a studio owes you money, you can add interest to your invoice at a rate of 8% above the Bank of England base rate, as per the Late Payment and Commercial Debts Interest Act of 1998. This applies when no other interest rate has been agreed upon in your contract, and if they still won't pay by a certain deadline, you can then take them to small claims court. If it gets that far, Bectu can help you with this, but the union rep did warn us that this process can take several months. If you win, the company has to pay you plus the court fees. Bectu and AVU are well versed in this process, so if you find yourself in a similar situation, do reach out to them for guidance and support. You can also find information about your employment rights and the process of adding interest to unpaid invoices on the HMRC website, and I have left links to both below. This video is getting really, really long, so I'm going to try and wrap this up as quickly as I can. Okay, so it took about a month and a half of persistently emailing and pressuring the studio before we all finally got paid. During this time, the union was working alongside us, advising us on exactly what to say in each email, when to send it, and honestly, this was such a massive help. Knowing that we had an experienced professional guiding us through this process just made it so much easier. No less stressful. It was still stressful, but it made it just a little bit easier. Overall, the experience working for a disorganized and exploitative studio, then having to fight for our wages for almost 2 months, was incredibly draining. On top of that, I was back to being unemployed and taking on odd jobs while searching for animation work. I kept pushing forward with my personal projects, working on the character designs and trying to keep up a consistent routine with that. But honestly, the stress took its toll. So posting update videos just had to take a back seat for a while I focused on my mental and physical health. By August, September, however, things had finally started turning around. The industry was slowly starting to recover, and I had an interview with a studio working on a new show, and in September I officially started working with them. The style and pace of this new show has been quite different to anything that I've worked on before. It's been much more fast paced, which has been quite a big mental shift for me. So the first few months were really intense, just juggling everything that I had to remember while working at full speed to meet these deadlines. So from September through to the end of November, it was just non-stop. But the studio I'm currently with has been amazing to work for. I don't have to worry about being paid on time. I'm not fighting with anyone for my wages. There are no endless meetings. I don't receive scenes that are missing props and characters. There is no chaos. There is just professional, organised and a supportive team, which I really, really appreciate after that experience with the previous studio. Working in animation and television is already demanding enough, so having a well-run production makes all the difference. Me again. I had a whole section talking about things in my personal life that had also been affecting me that year, but I decided to edit it out because the video was getting too long, and also I'm not sure how much I feel comfortable sharing online. I'm still something which I'm working through, but just to say, with the closing chapter, if there's a couple of things which don't make sense, then that's the reason why there's just a whole chapter missing. So I hope you understand. I know this video has been long, but if you made it this far, I appreciate you sticking with me. It has taken me a long while to post again. Last year was a roller coaster from start to finish, and in between grieving, stress, fighting those battles and just trying to survive, it's been a lot. But my birthday has left me feeling energised and positive for what's ahead. I just wanted to sit down and do this update, even if it's not the most polished. I have been wondering though if a more relaxed, chatty style like this is the way forwards. I do like documenting my process, but finding a balance between doing these updates and freelancing and making my films has been really, really tough. Doing the video like this has felt a lot easier, but I will be experimenting in videos to come, so do let me know what you prefer. Finally, if you are a recent graduate or thinking about switching to a career in animation and would like some feedback on your portfolio or website, please feel free to get in touch. Drop me a message on Instagram with links to your work and any questions you may have, and we will book a power hour to go through everything together. That's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.